I'm Kova Kardashian. I'm 32 years old. And right now, I'm standing outside my own house at 2 a.m., completely soaked from the rain, staring at my phone screen that's lighting up with notification after notification. 27 missed calls and counting. Inside, through the windows of the house I pay for, I can hear my husband Scott still screaming, his voice carrying through the suburban night like some kind of deranged neighborhood alarm system. You want to know how I ended up locked out of my own home, dripping wet, while the man I married 7 years ago loses his mind? Well, buckle up, because this story is about to take you on a ride that would make even my namesake family's drama look tame. But before I dive into this absolute circus of a night, I need to ask you a little thing. Please hit that like and subscribe button. Your support means the world to me, and we're creating the best community here. So here's where it all started. 3 days ago, when my mother-in-law Chris arrived for what was supposed to be a weekend visit. Now, I need you to understand something about Chris. Imagine if someone took all the judgment of a reality TV judge, mixed it with the passive aggression of a social media comment section, and then wrapped it all up in designer clothes and enough Botox to freeze a small continent. That's Chris. She walked into my house, the house I paid for with my marketing executive salary, and immediately started her performance. The coffee was too weak, the curtains were the wrong shade of white, my cooking lacked sophistication, and apparently, I was holding Scott back from achieving his true potential. For 2 days, I smiled, I nodded, I bit my tongue so hard I'm surprised it didn't fall off. But then came dinner on day 3. I had spent 4 hours making her favorite meal from scratch. Coco vin, which, by the way, is just fancy French for chicken swimming in wine. But whatever makes Chris feel sophisticated, right? She took one bite, placed her fork down with the precision of a surgeon, and announced to the table that when Scott was married to his ex, at least she knew how to properly braise meat. That's when something inside me just snapped. 7 years of these little comments, 7 years of being compared to everyone from his ex to his colleagues' wives to random women on Instagram. I calmly put down my own fork and said the words that would apparently end my marriage. Chris, I think it's time you learn that just because you raised Scott doesn't mean you get to raise me too. The silence that followed was so thick, you could have served it as dessert. Scott's face went through more color changes than a mood ring in a microwave. Chris's mouth opened and closed like a fish trying to comprehend air. And then, as if someone had pushed his berserker button, Scott stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "How dare you disrespect my mother in our house?" he started, his voice building from a whisper to a roar. "You will apologize to her right now, Kova. Right now." I looked at him, really looked at him for maybe the first time in years. This man who hadn't paid a bill in 3 years, who spent his days playing entrepreneur while I funded his podcast equipment, his cryptocurrency courses, his motivational speaking practice sessions that he performed to our empty garage. This man who wore designer clothes, bought with my credit card while telling people he was building an empire. And now he was demanding I apologize for finally standing up for myself. "No," I said. Simple as that, just no. What followed was an explosion that would have made Mount Vesuvius look like a gentle hiccup. Scott went from demanding to screaming to practically foaming at the mouth. His mother sat there with a little smirk, probably already mentally planning her victorious Facebook post about defending her baby boy from his terrible wife. And through it all, I just sat there, cutting my improperly braised chicken into smaller and smaller pieces, each cut feeling like a tiny act of rebellion. Then came the ultimatum that would change everything. "Get out of our house," he screamed, "and don't come back until you apologize, or never come back at all." The words echoed through our dining room, bounced off the walls I had painted, the floors I had chosen, the life I had built. His mother actually applauded. She literally clapped her hands like she was at a theater show. I stood up slowly, walked to get my purse, and headed for the door. The rain had just started, and I didn't even grab an umbrella. As I reached the threshold, I turned back and saw them both. Scott red-faced and panting like he'd just run a marathon of his own ego, and Chris looking like the cat who'd finally caught the canary she'd been hunting for 7 years. Neither of them noticed I was smiling. Standing in that rain, feeling it wash over me like some kind of suburban baptism, I pulled out my phone, not to call anyone for help, not to beg for forgiveness, but to check something that had been nagging at the back of my mind during Scott's entire performance. You see, when someone screams about it being our house while telling you to get out, it makes you think about who actually owns what. And as I stood there, water dripping off my nose, scrolling through my banking apps, a beautiful, terrible, absolutely delicious realization dawned on me. Everything was in my name. Everything. The house, my name, my credit, my down payment from my bonus 3 years ago, the utilities, all registered to Kova Kardashian. The streaming services, the cell phone plans, the car insurance, the credit cards Scott used daily, all mine. Even his precious home gym equipment that he used maybe twice a year was on a payment plan linked to my credit card. As I scrolled through account after account, I started laughing. Not a cute little giggle, but a full-on, bent over, catching my breath kind of laugh that probably made me look completely insane to any neighbor brave enough to peek through their curtains. Let me paint you a picture of Scott's financial contribution to our marriage. 3 years ago, he quit his job as a junior sales associate to pursue his passion. What passion, you ask? Well, that changed about every 6 months. First, he was going to be a cryptocurrency coach. Despite the fact that he once asked me if Bitcoin was a type of candy, he spent thousands on courses, equipment, and a website that looked like it was designed by someone who just discovered clip art. Total earnings? $0, and a lot of confused family members who thought he joined a digital cult. Then came his NFT art phase. He was going to be the next big digital artist, selling pixelated pictures of motivational quotes for thousands. He bought an expensive drawing tablet, subscribed to every design software known to man, and spent days creating what looked like fortune cookies had thrown up on MS Paint. He sold exactly one NFT to his mother, who still doesn't know what she bought or how to access it. The latest venture? Motivational speaking. He converted our garage into a studio, complete with professional lighting, cameras, and a backdrop that said, "Dream big, act bigger" in fonts that hurt my eyes. He practiced his speeches daily, recording himself giving advice about success while being financially supported by his wife. The irony was so thick, I could have spread it on toast. His YouTube channel had 47 subscribers. 46 were his family members, and one was a bot trying to sell him more subscribers. But here's what really got me as I stood there in the rain, going through our financial history like a detective solving my own life's mystery. I discovered things that made my wet, cold anger burn even hotter. There were subscriptions I didn't even know about. A premium dating app subscription on my credit card. Thank God it showed no activity. Probably because even his potential cheating was too lazy to actually execute. A membership to an exclusive business club downtown that he'd never mentioned, where he apparently went to network while networking meant drinking overpriced whiskey and pretending to be successful. The real kicker? A supplementary card on my account for his mother. Sweet, innocent Chris had been living it up on my dime, charging everything from her weekly salon visits to her designer purse collection. The woman who criticized my spending, who made snide comments about my shoe collection, had been literally using my money to fund her superiority complex. I found a 24-hour coffee shop 3 blocks away and settled in with my laptop, my phone, and a determination that could have powered a small city. The teenager behind the counter took one look at my soaked designer dress, my running mascara, and my manic energy, and wordlessly brought me towels and a free coffee. Sometimes solidarity comes from the most unexpected places. As I opened my laptop and started logging into every account, every service, every financial tie that bound me to Scott and his delusions of grandeur, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Real, tangible, about to teach someone a lesson power. My sister Kim always said I was too nice, that I let Scott walk all over me while wearing shoes I paid for. My other sister Courtney, the lawyer, had been begging me to get a prenup before the wedding, but I was young and in love and stupid enough to think love meant never having to check your credit card statements. Well, love was about to learn what happens when you push a Kardashian too far. Even if we're the knockoff Kardashians from the suburbs, we still know how to make a scene. The coffee shop's Wi-Fi became my command center, and I became a one-woman financial revolution. I started small, almost tenderly, like I was saying goodbye to each piece of my old life. Netflix was first, specifically his premium sports package that cost an extra $40 a month so he could watch games he'd sleep through. Click, gone. The satisfaction was so immediate I actually shivered, and not from my still damp clothes. Spotify Premium came next. Scott needed his Joe Rogan experience and his motivational podcast that he'd quote incorrectly at dinner parties. He'd actually once told my boss that success was about manifesting your destination, when the quote was about manifesting your destiny. My boss still brings it up at every office party. Click. Goodbye to ad-free toxic masculinity podcasts. Then I moved on to the gym membership. The platinum level one that included personal training sessions he'd scheduled but never attended, spa access he didn't know existed, and a juice bar tab that mysteriously charged green smoothies every day at 2 p.m., which was weird since Scott was allegedly working from home at that time. Click. No more paying $200 a month for his theoretical fitness. But I was just warming up. The car insurance was where things got interesting. See, Scott drove a BMW that was, of course, in my name and on my insurance. He'd insisted on the M Series because, apparently, a regular BMW wouldn't properly reflect his entrepreneurial spirit. I didn't cancel it entirely. I'm not a monster, and also that would be illegal. But I did remove him as a driver and changed it to storage insurance only. Let him figure out why his key fob suddenly wouldn't work when the policy updated at midnight. The phone plan was almost too easy. His iPhone 14 Pro Max with unlimited everything, including international calling he used, to phone his mother's cousins in Greece to brag about his non-existent success. His Apple Watch that tracked the steps he didn't take. His iPad Pro that he used exclusively to watch YouTube videos about how to be an alpha male. All disconnected effective immediately. The early termination fees? Worth every penny for the mental image of him trying to Instagram story his morning routine only to discover he had no service. Credit cards required more finesse. I couldn't just cancel them immediately. That would be too obvious and possibly legally problematic according to a quick Google search. But I could report them as lost and have new ones sent to my sister Kim's address. I could also remove him as an authorized user, effective immediately. The corporate card he used for his business lunches where he'd pitch ideas to anyone desperate enough to listen? Gone. The Amazon Prime card he used to buy podcasting equipment he didn't know how to use? Vanished. The airline miles card he used to book first-class flights to conferences where he'd pretend to be a speaker, but was really just attending free sessions? Disappeared into the digital ether. As I worked through each account, I discovered more beautiful, infuriating details. He had subscriptions to 3 different business course platforms, all teaching the same get-rich-quick schemes in slightly different fonts, a subscription to a luxury car rental app, despite owning a BMW, because apparently he needed to occasionally show up to meetings in a Lamborghini to really sell his success. A meal delivery service specifically for ketogenic dieters, which was hilarious because I'd watched him eat an entire pizza yesterday while explaining how carbs were poison. The supplementary card for his mother was my masterpiece. I didn't just cancel it. I requested a detailed statement first. $3,000 at Nordstrom last month, $800 at a spa the week before, $400 at a restaurant where she'd taken her book club to brag about her successful son and his lovely home, all on my credit card. All while she sat at my dinner table telling me I needed to be more frugal to support Scott's dreams. I set the cancellation for 6 a.m., right when she'd be trying to pay for her morning latte at her pretentious coffee club, where she held court every morning. The thought of Chris standing there, card declined, trying to explain to her social circle that there must be some mistake, while the barista held her $5 coffee hostage. It was better than therapy. But the best discovery came when I was going through our joint investment account, the one I'd been automatically contributing to, while Scott promised he'd match it when his business took off. Not only had he never contributed a penny, but he'd also been withdrawing small amounts regularly. The transactions were labeled market research, equipment testing, and my personal favorite, networking investments. I traced one networking investment to a charge at a high-end strip club. Apparently, that's where serious entrepreneurs network these days. I documented everything. Screenshots, PDFs, spreadsheets that would make my accountant sister Kendall weep with joy. 7 years of financial abuse laid out in neat columns and damning evidence. The kind of evidence that divorce lawyers dream about. Not that I was thinking about divorce. Not yet. First, I wanted Scott to understand exactly what he'd thrown away with his little tantrum. By 4 a.m., I'd systematically removed Scott from every financial comfort he'd grown accustomed to: the streaming services, the subscriptions, the insurance, the credit cards, the phone plan, even his beloved LinkedIn Premium that he used to stalk successful people and pretend he knew them. Everything would shut off in waves throughout the morning, a perfectly timed symphony of reality checks. The only thing I left untouched was the utilities at the house. I'm not cruel enough to leave someone without power and water. But the cable, the internet, the smart home system he loved to show off to his friends, those were luxuries, and luxuries were about to become a thing of his past. By 6 a.m., I was at my sister Kim's penthouse, freshly showered, wearing her designer pajamas, and clutching a mimosa, while we watched my Ring doorbell app like it was the season finale of our favorite reality show. Kim had set up what she called the war room: 3 laptops, 2 iPads, and a phone specifically to record everything for potential legal purposes. Courtney was already there with her legal pad, making notes about marital property laws, while Kendall was spreadsheeting my finances with the kind of glee usually reserved for Christmas morning. At exactly 6:47 a.m., we watched Scott stumble to the kitchen in his boxers and his business mindset motivates t-shirt. He went straight for the coffee maker, his precious smart coffee maker that he'd programmed to have his extra strong Brazilian blend ready every morning. He pressed the button. Nothing. Pressed it again. Still nothing. He actually hit it, like that would somehow reconnect the Wi-Fi I disconnected it from. Then began what my sisters and I would later call the Great Unraveling. Scott went for his phone to Google the coffee maker manual. No service. He tried the Wi-Fi. Password changed. He attempted to use the smart home app to check the system. Account no longer authorized. The confusion on his face was so pure, so complete, that Kendall actually took a photo of the laptop screen to frame later. By 7:15, he'd discovered the credit card situation. We could see him on the kitchen camera, trying to order coffee delivery on his phone, his face growing redder with each declined payment method. He tried 4 different cards, even the emergency one he thought I didn't know about, the one I'd actually set up for him years ago, and had just finished canceling an hour earlier. The panic was starting to set in. He ran to his home office, his entrepreneurial command center, and tried to boot up his computer. No internet. He couldn't access his cloud storage, his YouTube channel, his 17 different business email accounts. Nothing. He was digitally castrated, and the realization was dawning on him like a very expensive sunrise. At 7:32, Chris arrived. She'd clearly been crying. Mascara making her look like a raccoon who'd lost a fight with a makeup counter. The declined card at her coffee club had been, according to the text she'd sent Scott that he couldn't receive, the most humiliating experience of her life. Someone from her book club had to pay for her latte. A $5 latte had finally brought Chris to her knees. We couldn't hear what they were saying, but the gesticulation was Oscar-worthy. Scott was pointing at various electronics like they'd personally betrayed him. Chris was waving her dead credit card like it was supposed to magically reactivate through sheer force of will. At one point, Scott actually shook his phone at the sky, as if the cell towers were personally conspiring against him. Hey ladies, I know you're invested in this story, and honestly, your support means everything to me. If you've ever wanted to see someone get exactly what they deserved, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Think of it as your way of telling every woman out there that we see them, we support them, and sometimes, just sometimes, we get to watch karma work in real time. Your subscription isn't just supporting me. It's joining a community of people who believe that respect in a relationship isn't optional. And if you've got your own story of sweet revenge, drop it in the comments. We're all here for the tea, and honey, I've got the cups ready. By 8 a.m., Scott had tried to leave the house, probably to go grovel at the bank or find a phone store, but his BMW wouldn't start. Not because I'd done anything to it. I'm not that kind of person. But the insurance update meant the smart features were disabled, and Scott, who'd insisted on every possible electronic upgrade, couldn't figure out how to manually unlock a car he'd been driving for 2 years. He stood in the driveway, pulling at the door handle like a caveman discovering tools for the first time. The neighbors were starting to notice. Mrs. Patterson from across the street was pretending to water her plants while obviously filming. Mr. Chen next door had given up all pretense and was just standing on his porch with coffee, watching like it was free theater. Scott, still in his boxers and motivational t-shirt, was now trying to explain to them that there was a technical glitch while his mother stood behind him, informing everyone who would listen that this was all the fault of his ungrateful wife. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Scott trying to go to Starbucks on foot, borrowing $20 cash from Mr. Chen with the promise that he'd transfer it back immediately. Of course, his banking app wouldn't work without phone service. The barista, a young woman who'd seen him flash his credit cards for years while loudly taking fake business calls, watched him count out crumpled bills for a basic coffee. He actually told her he was experiencing temporary technical difficulties with his vast financial portfolio. She gave him the look every service worker perfects, the one that says, "I don't get paid enough to care about your lies." The voicemail started around 9 a.m. He'd borrowed Chris's phone, and the messages were a journey through the 5 stages of grief at double speed. The first was pure anger. "How dare you pull this childish stunt, Kova?" The second, denial. "This has to be some kind of mistake with the bank." Then bargaining. "Just turn the internet back on so I can fix this." Depression. "I can't believe you're doing this to me." And finally, a weird form of acceptance that sounded more like confusion. "Are you serious right now? Is this really happening?" What Scott didn't know was that this was just the beginning. Every hour, another service would shut off. The cable was scheduled for noon, the smart home system at 2 p.m., the automated lawn service, the pool cleaning, the grocery delivery subscription, all of it timed to disappear throughout the day like his dignity, one payment decline at a time. By day 2, Scott had reached levels of desperation that would have been tragic if they weren't so deeply satisfying to watch. He'd spent the night at his mother's house because, surprise, surprise, the smart locks on our house had mysteriously reset themselves to a new code. Watching him try to break into his own home while wearing yesterday's motivational t-shirt was like watching a nature documentary about karma and its natural habitat. The utilities had started their scheduled shutoff. First went the premium cable package he needed to watch his entrepreneurial success shows. Then, the high-speed internet he required for his very important podcast that 12 people listened to, half of whom were related to him. By noon, he was sitting in his mother's living room, trying to run his empire from her tablet, with the screen brightness turned down to save battery, because even she was starting to worry about her electricity bill. But the real entertainment started when Scott tried to access our joint savings account. Now, I hadn't touched that money. I'm not a thief, but I had frozen it using a security feature that requires both account holders to authorize any transactions in person, together, at the bank, with valid ID and working phone numbers for verification. Watching him try to explain to the bank manager why his wife wasn't answering his calls while his mother sat beside him loudly, proclaiming that I was probably having a mental breakdown, was better than any comedy show I'd ever paid for. His friends, those successful entrepreneurs he was always networking with, were suddenly very busy. Jake, his best friend who'd borrowed $3,000 6 months ago for his revolutionary app idea that was just Uber but for people who wanted to walk places, wasn't returning calls. Marcus, his workout buddy who hadn't worked out in 2 years, claimed he was in Dubai when Scott spotted him at the local gas station. Even his barber suddenly couldn't fit him in, which was suspicious since Scott had been going there every 2 weeks for 5 years, paying with my credit card for the premium treatment that included a beard trim he didn't need because he could barely grow facial hair. The job situation was where things got genuinely pathetic. Scott's boss, and I use that term loosely because being a freelance consultant for your uncle's failing real estate blog isn't exactly employment, called to ask why he'd missed the morning meeting. Scott had to explain that his home office was temporarily offline due to technical difficulties beyond his control. His uncle, who'd been paying him out of pity more than need, suggested maybe it was time Scott considered getting a real job with a steady paycheck. the silence that followed that suggestion was so long, his mother actually checked if the phone was still connected. Then came the social media apocalypse. Scott discovered that without his phone, he couldn't access his two-factor authentication to get into any of his accounts. His Instagram, where he posted daily motivation quotes over pictures of sports cars he didn't own. His LinkedIn, where his job title changed monthly, but always included words like visionary and disruptor. His Twitter, where he had opinions about cryptocurrency despite not understanding regular currency. All of it locked behind a phone number that no longer existed in his accessible universe. But Chris, sweet Chris, was having her own journey of discovery. Without her supplementary card, she was learning what the rest of us call budgeting. She actually asked Scott if $40 for groceries was enough for the week. When he pointed out that her usual coffee order was $12, she looked at him like he just told her Santa wasn't real. The woman who'd spent $300 on anti-aging cream last week was now Googling homemade face mask recipes. The revelation came when Chris tried to help Scott by calling me herself. She left a voicemail that would later become evidence exhibit A through Z. She started with how disappointed she was in my behavior, transitioned into threats about how she'd make sure everyone knew what kind of wife I was, and ended with a fascinating confession that she'd always known I wasn't good enough for her baby boy, who was destined for greatness if only I hadn't held him back with my selfish need for him to contribute to our household. What she didn't know was that Courtney had already started documenting everything for what she called the inevitable legal proceedings. Every voicemail, every text, sent from borrowed phones, every attempted login to the frozen accounts. We had screenshots of Scott's dating app profile, spreadsheets of his spending versus his earning, which was basically a comparison between Mount Everest and a pothole, and testimonies from neighbors who'd watched him scream at me to get out of my own house. The twist that even I didn't see coming happened on day 3. Scott's ex-girlfriend, the one his mother always compared me to, reached out on Facebook. Turns out, she'd been watching the situation unfold through mutual friends' posts and wanted me to know that Scott had done the exact same thing to her. Same financial exploitation, same mother-in-law manipulation, same eventual explosion when she finally stood up for herself. She even had receipts, literally. Credit card statements, bank records, and the piece de resistance, a video of Scott having an almost identical meltdown 5 years ago, screaming at her to get out of an apartment she paid for. My sisters, bless their strategically savage hearts, decided it was time for what Kim called Operation Reality Check. Now, when a Kardashian plans an intervention, even knockoff suburban Kardashians like us, it's not just a gathering, it's a production. Courtney handled the legal angle, Kendall managed the financial documentation, and Kim handled the social warfare with the precision of a general who'd studied at the University of Petty with a PhD in public humiliation. It started with a simple Facebook post from Kim, a photo of all 4 of us sisters at brunch looking fabulous with the caption, "Supporting family through transitions. Remember, ladies, you can't build an empire with someone who thinks they're the kingdom." The comment section exploded faster than Scott's entrepreneurial dreams. Everyone wanted to know what happened. And while we stayed classy and vague, the neighbors who'd witnessed Scott's driveway meltdown were more than happy to fill in the details. Mrs. Patterson, God bless her nosy soul, shared her Ring doorbell footage of Scott in his boxers, trying to break into his BMW while screaming about technical difficulties. Mr. Chen commented about the $20 Scott still owed him, adding that he'd accept payment in actual currency, not cryptocurrency or motivational speeches. Even the barista from Starbucks chimed in, professionally noting that they hoped Mr. Kardashian's vast financial portfolio issues would resolve soon, complete with a crying laughing emoji. The neighborhood WhatsApp group, which Scott had used to promote his various business ventures, became a support group for everyone he'd tried to rope into his schemes. Turns out, I wasn't the only one tired of his act. 3 neighbors admitted they'd been avoiding him after he'd pitched them on becoming downstream partners in what was obviously a pyramid scheme, but with essential oils for mental clarity that were just coconut oil with lavender. But the real intervention came when Scott's potential employers started Googling him. See, with his social media locked and his professional website down because I'd canceled the hosting, all they found were the recent posts about him being kicked out of his own house for financial fraud, and the newly surfaced video from his ex showing a pattern of behavior. One recruiter actually called me by mistake, thinking I was his reference, and when I explained I was his soon-to-be ex-wife, she thanked me for saving her company from a potential lawsuit, and hung up so fast I heard sonic boom. His mother's book club, that sacred circle of suburban superiority, turned on her faster than a pack of wolves in Lululemon. These women, who'd been forced to endure Chris's bragging for years, were delighted to discover her successful son was actually a financially dependent man-child. The president of the club, a savage woman named Margaret, who'd clearly been waiting for this moment, publicly asked Chris if she needed recommendations for financial literacy courses for her family. The secretary offered to start a GoFundMe for Scott's theoretical businesses. The treasurer suggested they read a book about enabling adult children next month. Scott's boss uncle finally had enough when reporters from a local blog about entrepreneurial failures called asking for a comment about his nephew. That's right, Scott had become such a spectacular failure that he was becoming a cautionary tale in real time. His uncle not only fired him, but also sent a family-wide email explaining that he'd been enabling Scott for too long, and it was time for tough love. He ended it with a line that would haunt Scott forever. Sometimes the best investment is knowing when to cut your losses. The investigation into his business dealings revealed something hilarious and horrifying in equal measure. His cryptocurrency coaching website? He'd been copying and pasting advice from Reddit forums, sometimes forgetting to remove usernames like CryptoKing420 and ToddTheMoon69. His NFT art was literally traced from a children's coloring book. We found the exact matches. And his motivational speaking content? Plagiarized from a combination of fortune cookies, Instagram quotes, and a self-help book written in 1982 that he'd found at a yard sale. My personal favorite discovery was his business partner in the motivational speaking venture. Remember how he practiced in our garage? Turns out he'd convinced some poor soul named Brad to invest $10,000 in their joint venture. Brad, who'd been trying to reach Scott about their upcoming conference presentation, discovered through the neighborhood Facebook drama that his business partner was broke, homeless, and couldn't even access email. Brad's subsequent small claims court filing became public record, adding another layer to Scott's rapidly deteriorating reputation. The family meeting happened on day 4, in the conference room at Courtney's law firm, because she wanted everything on record. And secretly because the conference room had excellent lighting for the documentation photos Kim insisted on taking. Scott arrived in a borrowed suit that was 2 sizes too big, apparently from his mother's neighbor's deceased husband's closet. Chris wore what can only be described as funeral chic, complete with a black veil, as if she was mourning the death of her son's imaginary empire. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. Scott showed up at 1:30, probably hoping to establish dominance by being early, but ended up sitting in the lobby for 30 minutes because Courtney's assistant, who'd heard all the stories, made him wait while she finished her lunch. By the time he was allowed in, he'd sweated through the borrowed suit and looked like he'd been interrogated by the FBI instead of just sitting under fluorescent lights. I wore my best power suit, the red one I'd bought with my last bonus, the one Scott had said was too aggressive for a woman. Courtney sat beside me in full lawyer mode, with enough documents to build a small fort. Kim was there for moral support and strategic photography. Kendall attended via video call, her spreadsheets ready to deploy like financial weapons of mass destruction. Scott opened with what he probably thought was charm, but came across as desperation wrapped in delusion. He actually started with, "I'm willing to forgive you for this overreaction if we can move past it quickly." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear his borrowed suit creaking. Courtney slid the first document across the table, a comprehensive list of every penny I'd spent supporting his lifestyle for the past 3 years. The total was the kind of number that makes you question your life choices and your optometrist because surely you're not seeing that many zeros correctly. He tried to argue that his businesses were investments in our future. Kendall screen shared a profit and loss statement that showed his total business earnings over 3 years, negative $47,000. That's not a loss. That's a financial black hole. His cryptocurrency coaching had earned $0 but cost $8,000 in courses he'd taken. His NFT art had earned $50 from his mother, but cost $3,000 in software and equipment. His motivational speaking had earned $200 from a pity booking at his cousin's community college, but cost $15,000 in studio setup. Then came Chris's moment of truth. When confronted with her credit card statements, she tried to claim they were gifts from her son, until Courtney produced the supplementary card agreement, clearly showing it was under my account. The purchases ranged from reasonable to ridiculous. A $2,000 handbag the week after she told me I should shop at discount stores to save money, $500 at a restaurant where she'd hosted a dinner party celebrating Scott's success in business, and my personal favorite, a subscription to a luxury car rental service so she could occasionally show up to her book club in a Mercedes instead of her paid-off Toyota. The confession finally came when I played a recording. Yes, I'd been recording too. Legally, since we were in a one-party consent state. Thank you, Courtney, for that tip. It was Scott on a call with his friend Jake from a week before the blow-up, laughing about how he'd figured out the perfect system. Marry someone successful, convince them you're building something big, and live off their income while you figure yourself out. He actually used the phrase, "She's basically my investor who doesn't know she's not getting returns." His face went through so many colors I thought he might actually transform into a rainbow. Chris started crying, but not pretty tears. The ugly, mascara-running, nose-dripping kind that made her look like a melting wax figure. She actually turned to Scott and said the words I'd been waiting to hear for 7 years. "You told me Kova was controlling about money. You said she was holding you back." The negotiation itself was swift and brutal. I wanted a divorce, obviously. But more than that, I wanted recognition. I wanted Scott to sign a document admitting to financial abuse, misrepresentation of his business activities, and fraud regarding the supplementary credit card his mother had been using. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue criminal charges or go after him for the money he'd already spent. Clean break, no alimony obviously since he had no income. And I kept everything I'd paid for, which was everything. Scott tried to negotiate. He actually suggested we try couples therapy first, as if there was a therapist in the world qualified to deal with his level of delusion. When that didn't work, he proposed a business partnership where he'd pay me back once his ventures succeeded. Kendall actually laughed so hard she knocked her camera over. The idea that Scott would ever generate enough income to pay back a 7-figure debt was like expecting a goldfish to win an Olympic swimming medal. The final straw came when he tried to blame everything on his mother's influence, throwing Chris under the bus so fast she didn't even see it coming. He claimed she'd pressured him to maintain a certain lifestyle, that she'd convinced him I was controlling, that she'd manipulated their relationship. Chris's gasp was so dramatic, it probably registered on seismic equipment. She stood up, pointed at her son, and delivered a monologue about sacrifice and motherhood that would have been moving if it hadn't been completely delusional. Then the twist nobody expected. Scott's father called. The man who divorced Chris 15 years ago and moved to Florida to escape what he called her narcissistic tornado. He was on speaker, and his message was simple. "Son, I love you, but you've become everything I tried to prevent you from becoming. Stop blaming others, get a job, and maybe you'll salvage some dignity before you hit 40. The call ended with him offering me his support in the divorce and suggesting I write a book about my experience as a warning to others. The divorce was finalized in record time, 43 days from filing to decree. Scott didn't contest anything, probably because Courtney had made it clear that fighting would mean releasing all the evidence publicly, including the truly embarrassing stuff we'd held back, like his browser history, showing he'd Googled how to convince wife you're successful while broke, and his Amazon cart full of books about manipulating your way to wealth. The immediate aftermath was poetic. Scott moved back in with Chris into his childhood bedroom that still had his participation trophies from Little League and a poster of a Lamborghini he'd never come close to affording. He got a job at a cell phone store, ironically selling the service plans he could no longer afford. His first day, he had to serve Mr. Chen, who made sure to mention the $20 Scott still owed him while buying the most expensive phone in the store with cash. Chris had her own journey of discovery. Without access to my credit card, she had to get a job for the first time in 20 years. She ended up at a department store makeup counter, selling the same products she used to buy with my money. The first time one of her book club members came in and found her working there, Chris tried to pretend she was doing research for a novel about the working class. Nobody believed her, but everyone enjoyed watching her learn to clock in. I, on the other hand, flourished like a plant that had finally gotten rid of the parasites draining its nutrients. Without Scott's constant financial drain, I paid off the credit cards in 3 months, saved enough for a down payment on a better house, and started my own consulting firm. The first client, Brad, Scott's abandoned business partner, who needed help salvaging his actual business after the motivational speaking disaster. We ended up creating a successful online course about recognizing and avoiding business scams, using Scott as the anonymous cautionary tale. 6 months later, I met Marcus at a financial literacy workshop I was running. Not Scott's fake workout buddy Marcus, but a different Marcus, an actual entrepreneur who owned a successful chain of gyms and could explain cryptocurrency without using the words to the moon or diamond hands. He had his own money, his own house, and most importantly, his own identity that didn't require a supporting cast of enablers and credit cards. The engagement happened a year after the divorce. Marcus proposed at my company's launch party in front of 200 clients and colleagues with a ring he'd bought himself. Chris actually tried to crash the party, claiming she wanted to apologize. But security, which I'd hired specifically anticipating this, politely escorted her out while she screamed about being the mother-in-law. The video went viral in our industry circles as the perfect example of boundaries in action. Scott tried to reinvent himself again, this time as a life coach specializing in failure recovery. The irony was lost on him, but not on the internet, where his website became a meme in entrepreneurial forums. His tagline, "I've been to the bottom so you don't have to," was particularly mocked since his version of bottom was moving back to his mom's house in the suburbs. He had 12 clients total, all of whom left after realizing his advice was just recycled podcast content about manifesting success while actively demonstrating failure. The wedding to Marcus was everything my first wedding wasn't, paid for entirely by us, with no toxic in-laws, and a prenup so thorough it could be used as a legal textbook. During the reception, my phone buzzed with a notification. Scott had sent a Venmo request for $20 with the note, "For old time's sake, investment opportunity." I screenshotted it, posted it to my Instagram story with crying laughing emojis, and watched it get shared thousands of times as the perfect example of an ex who never learns. The real kicker came 2 years later. I was featured in a major business magazine about successful female entrepreneurs. The article mentioned my previous marriage only briefly, referring to it as a learning experience about the importance of financial independence. Scott, who was still working at the phone store and living with his mother, apparently tried to claim credit for my success, telling customers that his mentorship during their marriage had inspired my business acumen. His manager, who'd read the article, wrote him up for lying to customers. Chris wrote a book, self-published obviously because no real publisher would touch it, Raising Kings in a World of Peasants, A Mother's Journey, sold exactly 73 copies, mostly to her increasingly small social circle. The one-star reviews were entertaining, especially the one from Scott's father that simply said, "This is why I live in Florida now." She tried to do a book signing at the local library, but more people showed up to return overdue books than to meet her. But here's the best part, the part that makes this whole story worth it. Last month, I ran into Scott at a gas station. He was driving a used Honda Civic with a Domino's delivery sign on top. His latest venture was gig economy work. He tried to pitch me on a new business idea involving AI and wellness coaching. I listened politely, then handed him my business card. My company helps people recover from financial abuse and build independent wealth. He looked at the card, looked at me in my Tesla, looked at Marcus in the passenger seat, and for the first time in his life, had nothing to say. As I drove away, I saw him in the rearview mirror, still holding my business card, standing next to his delivery car, wearing the same motivational t-shirt from 3 years ago, but now faded and stretched. The last thing I heard was his phone pinging with a delivery order, probably taking him back to the suburbs where his mother was waiting to tell him about her day selling makeup to women who used to respect her. The moral of this story? Never let anyone make you small in your own home. Never let someone build their kingdom on your foundation while telling you you're not worthy of the castle. And most importantly, when someone shows you who they are, a person who screams at you to get out of the house you pay for, believe them. Then change the passwords, cancel the cards, and watch them discover what it's like to actually earn the life they've been pretending to have. Oh, and that 27 missed calls from the title? It became 2,700 over the next month. I saved them all. Sometimes when I'm having a bad day, I scroll through them and remember that the best revenge isn't just success. It's success that's password protected, legally documented, and completely out of reach of the person who tried to dim your light. Want to know the absolute final twist that just happened last week? Scott's latest girlfriend reached out to me on LinkedIn. She wanted to verify his employment history because something seemed off about his claims of being a CEO. I sent her the magazine article about my business, the divorce decree showing financial abuse, and a link to this very story. Her response was simply, "Girl, thank you. Running now." And that's how you turn 27 missed calls into a whole new life. A life where your credit cards are your own, your house is your sanctuary, and your mother-in-law is someone else's problem. Because karma isn't just a bad girl. Sometimes it's a whole bankruptcy court.